The battlefield was silent for only a moment, before the air shook with the sound of metal and fire. Soldiers from the alien empire marched forward in perfect formation. Their blue and silver armor reflected the pale light of the twin suns. They carried weapons that could tear apart steel with one shot. They looked unstoppable. Among them was Queen Serenia, the most feared warrior of her kind. Her eyes were cold, her posture proud, and her voice could command thousands without a single tremor. She sat high on a chariot of black crystal, drawn by armored beasts. Every soldier bowed as she passed. She had led her people to victory in countless wars. She did not believe defeat was possible that far away. Chained and kneeling in the mud, a human slave named Kael watched the alien army. His wrists were raw from iron cuffs. His clothes were torn from months of hard labor in the alien mines. He had seen the queen many times from a distance. To him, she was the symbol of cruelty. She was the reason he had been taken from his home. She was the reason so many humans suffered. But the war that came that day was not against humans. It was something far worse. From beyond the mountains, an enemy army appeared. They were the Varkesh, a brutal race with bodies like moving stone and claws sharper than blades. They did not march in neat lines. They came like a storm, smashing everything in their path. The first clash shook the ground. Alien soldiers fell under the heavy strikes of the Varkesh. Their armor cracked. Their formation broke. Screams filled the air. The queen fought at the front, her twin spears spinning in a blur of light. She cut down enemy after enemy, her movements graceful but deadly. Kael watched as the battle turned into chaos. The queen's forces were being pushed back. The ground was littered with broken weapons, torn banners, and the wounded. The smell of burning metal and blood filled the air. Then it happened. A massive Varkesh warrior leaped at the queen. She turned, but not fast enough. Its claw raked across her leg, tearing through her armor. She staggered back, blood running down her scaled thigh. Another enemy struck her from the side, and she fell to one knee. Her guards rushed to protect her. But the Varkesh pushed them away. The queen was surrounded. She struck back, but her movements slowed. Pain spread through her body. Her chariot had been destroyed. Her soldiers were scattered. Kael's heart pounded. He had every reason to hate her. But as he watched the queen fight to stay alive, something inside him shifted. She was no longer the untouchable ruler. She was just another living being facing death. And death was closing in fast. The chain on Kael's wrist was still tied to a post near the battlefield. He pulled hard, ignoring the pain. The wood cracked, and the post came loose. He grabbed a fallen spear from the ground. He had no armor, no plan, and no reason to expect survival. But he moved forward anyway. The queen was falling backward when Kael reached her. One Varkesh raised its weapon too. Strike her down. Kael drove the spear into its side with all his strength. The creature roared and turned toward him. Its massive hand swung, hitting him hard in the chest, but he held his ground. The queen stared at him in shock. Her enemy was not a soldier from her army. It was a human slave. And yet, here he was, standing between her and certain death. Kael fought with desperate speed, blocking strikes, thrusting the spear, using every bit of strength left in his tired body. The Varkesh lunged again, but Kael dodged and stabbed upward, forcing it to retreat. Two more enemies closed in. Kael grabbed the queen's arm and pulled her toward the ruins of a broken wall. She could barely walk, her leg bleeding heavily. She leaned on him for balance. The sound of battle roared all around, but in that moment, there was only the two of them and the fight to stay alive. They reached the wall, and Kael pushed her down behind it for cover. His hands were shaking, his breath ragged. The queen was still staring at him, her eyes wide with something he had never seen in them before: confusion. "You," she said, her voice low but sharp. "Why?" Kael didn't answer right away. He was too busy scanning the battlefield for the next threat. But inside, he didn't know the answer himself. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something deeper. Queen's guards finally found them, forming a line of defense. They pulled her away from Kael, glaring at him as if he had no right to be near her. But before they carried her off, she looked at him one more time. It was not the look of a ruler. To a slave. It was something different. Something he could not name, and in that silent moment, Kael knew the war had just changed for both of them. Asterisk. The sky was still thick with smoke when Kael was dragged back to the slave lines. The battle had moved further away, but the screams and thunder of weapons still echoed. 2 alien guards shoved him to the ground, their expressions filled with contempt. "You don't touch the queen," one snarled, kicking dirt in his face. "You're alive only because she didn't order your execution on the spot." Kael stayed silent. His chest ached from the hit he had taken earlier. His arms burned from the weight of the spear he had wielded. He felt every bruise and cut. But none of it mattered. His mind kept returning to the look in the queen's eyes when he had saved her. In the distance, he could see her being carried into a large medical tent. Her proud posture was gone. Her leg was wrapped in glowing bandages, and her armor was cracked. For the first time, she looked like someone who could break. Night fell quickly. The campfires flickered across the field, casting shadows on tired soldiers and silent slaves. The Varkesh had been pushed back, but everyone knew they would return. The air smelled of smoke and fear. Kael sat near a fire, eating the small portion of dried bread he was given. Around him, the other humans whispered. They had seen what he had done. Some called him a fool. Others said he had just painted a target on his back. But no one could deny it. He had stood where no slave dared stand. He was still awake when 2 heavily armored guards approached. One grabbed his arm and pulled him up roughly. "The queen requests your presence," the guard said, his tone sharp. Kael's stomach tightened. This could be a trick. She could be summoning him to punish him for daring to act without her command. But there was no way to refuse. They led him through rows of soldiers until they reached the medical tent. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the faint scent of healing herbs. Queen Serenia sat on a raised bed, her legs supported by metal braces. Her armor had been removed, replaced with a ceremonial robe of deep blue. Even injured, she looked powerful, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "You," she said, her voice calm but heavy with authority. "Step forward." Kael obeyed, standing a few steps away from her. "You interfered in a battle that was not yours," she said. "You broke your chains, you took up a weapon, and you killed in my defense." Her words carried no hint of gratitude. They sounded like accusations. "Yes," Kael replied simply. The queen studied him for a long moment. "Do you know why I should have you executed for that?" Kael met her eyes. "Because I am a slave and I acted without permission." She leaned forward slightly. "Then why did you do it?" For a moment, Kael didn't answer. He searched for the truth inside himself. "Because I could," he finally said. "Because you were about to die, and I was close enough to stop it. I didn't think about who you were. I just acted." The queen's eyes narrowed, but she did not speak. The silence between them was sharp. "You hate me," she said at last. It wasn't a question. Kael's jaw tightened. "I hate what you've done to my people." Her gaze didn't waver. "And yet you saved me." "That doesn't change the truth," he replied. For a moment, something unreadable passed over her face. Then she straightened. "Very well, you will not be executed. Instead, you will serve me directly until this war is over." Kael stared at her. "Serve you? You will guard me," she said. "I cannot fight at full strength until my leg heals. You will be my blade and my shield. If I die, you die. If I live, you live." It was not a choice. Kael knew it. He also knew that Accepting meant staying close to the one person he despised most. But refusing was impossible. "I understand," he said. The queen motioned to the guards. "Remove his chains. Give him a soldier's weapon. He belongs to me now." The guards hesitated, but obeyed. The iron cuffs fell from Kael's wrists. For the first time in months, he felt the air on his bare skin. As they left the tent together, the camp grew quiet. Soldiers stared, slaves whispered. The sight of a human walking beside the queen was something no one had ever imagined. Kael felt every eye on him. But his focus stayed on the queen's words, "If I die, you die." The war outside was far from over. And now, his survival was tied to hers in a way neither of them had expected. The morning came with the sound of war drums. Kael stood outside the queen's command tent, wearing light armor for the first time since his capture. It was simple compared to the ornate armor of the alien soldiers, but it fit him well. The sword in his hand was heavier than the mining tools he was used to, but it felt right. Inside, Queen Serenia spoke with her generals. Her leg was still bound in metal braces, but her voice carried over the noise of the camp. She ordered troop movements, defense lines, and supply routes. Her tone was sharp, leaving no space for doubt or weakness. Kael kept his eyes on the horizon. The Varkesh could attack at any moment. The open field beyond the camp was covered in mist, and the shapes moving in it could have been soldiers or shadows. Every sound made his grip tighten on his sword. When the queen stepped out, the soldiers straightened. She glanced at Kael briefly, as if measuring him, then nodded toward the eastern side of the camp. "Walk with me." He followed her past rows of soldiers sharpening weapons and engineers repairing war machines. Every pair of eyes followed them. To the soldiers, Kael was an outsider, unworthy of walking beside their queen. To the human slaves, he was a mystery, someone who had crossed an invisible line that none of them dared approach. "You are quiet," the queen said as they moved between the tents. "My job is to guard you," Kael replied, "not to talk." Her lips curved slightly, though it was hard to tell if it was amusement or scorn. "And yet you spoke your mind yesterday without hesitation." "That was different," he said. They stopped at the edge of the camp where the land sloped down to a shallow river. The queen's gaze swept across the water to the distant hills. "The Varkesh are regrouping there. When they strike again, they will come for me first. My death would break my army's spirit. That is why you stand where you do." Kael's voice was steady. "Then I'll make sure they don't reach you." She looked at him for a long moment. "You may hate me, human, but on the battlefield, hatred cannot guide your blade. Focus, or you will die." Before Kael could answer, the horns of alarm blared. Shouts echoed across the camp. Soldiers scrambled into formation. The mist beyond the river had begun to churn with movement, dark shapes rushing forward. The queen turned and limped, back toward the main lines, her guards moving in close. Kael stayed at her side, matching her pace. The Varkesh hit the riverbank. With a roar, they were larger than most soldiers, their stone-like skin deflecting many strikes. Arrows bounced off them, and only direct hits to the joints or eyes could bring them down. Kael's first clash came fast. One of the creatures broke through the line and swung a heavy blade at the queen. Kael stepped in, blocking with his sword. The impact sent pain through his arm, but he didn't back away. He countered, aiming for the gap in the creature's shoulder plates. The blade sank in, and the Varkesh staggered back before falling. More enemies came. Kael fought with sharp, efficient movements. He wasn't a trained soldier, but his body remembered the rhythm of hard labor, the strength built from years of survival. Each time a Varkesh tried to reach the queen, he was there, cutting them down or forcing them away. The queen's guards fought hard too, but Kael noticed something. Even wounded, Serenia's presence was like a shield for her soldiers. She shouted orders, pointed out enemy weaknesses, and drove her warriors forward. Her voice alone kept the lines from breaking. A sudden crash shook the ground. From the mist emerged a massive Varkesh warlord, twice the size of the others, carrying a weapon like a slab of sharpened stone. Its eyes locked on the queen. Kael stepped in front of her without thinking. The warlord's first strike nearly knocked him off his feet. His sword bent under the weight, but he twisted aside and slashed at the creature's leg. It roared and kicked, sending him sprawling. The queen raised her spear and struck, but the warlord caught it, snapping it in half. She stumbled back, her injured leg giving way. The warlord lifted its weapon for the killing blow. Kael rolled to his feet, grabbed a fallen spear from the ground, and drove it upward with every bit of strength he had. The point pierced the warlord's chest, sliding deep between its armor plates. It staggered, roaring in rage before collapsing into the mud. Kael stood over it, chest heaving. The queen's eyes met his for a brief second. There was no scorn in them this time, only something closer to respect. The battle raged on, but the enemy was breaking. The sight of their warlord falling sent the Varkesh retreating toward the hills. The horns of victory sounded, though the field was littered with the fallen. When it was over, the queen's guards surrounded her again. But this time, she motioned for Kael to walk beside her. "You fight without fear," she said quietly as they moved through the aftermath. "I fight because I have to," Kael replied. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she turned forward again. Perhaps that is the only kind of warrior worth having. And for the first time, Kael thought he saw the faintest trace of a smile on her face. The camp was quieter after the battle, but the silence felt heavy. Fires burned low, and soldiers moved slowly, carrying the wounded or dragging away the dead. The smell of smoke, blood, and damp earth hung in the air. Kael walked beside the queen as she made her way to the command tent. Her leg brace clicked with each step, but she refused help from her guards. Her armor had been replaced by a simpler battle robe, yet even in plain cloth, she carried herself like a ruler carved from stone. When they reached the tent, the generals gathered around. They bowed their heads before speaking, voices low but urgent. The Varkesh had retreated, but scouts reported they were gathering more forces beyond the hills. The next attack would be larger and fiercer. Kael stayed near the entrance, eyes scanning the tent. He had learned to read faces, and what he saw unsettled him. Some of the queen's generals didn't look at her directly. A few exchanged glances. When she spoke, as if questioning her decisions, the meeting ended and the generals left one by one. When the tent was empty, the queen turned her gaze on Kael. "You noticed it, didn't you?" Kael nodded slowly. "Some of them don't trust you anymore." "They never did," she said. "Victory hides doubt. Defeat feeds it." He thought about that for a moment. "You think someone might turn against you?" She didn't answer, but her silence was enough. That night, Kael patrolled the perimeter of the queen's tent. The moonlight painted the camp in shades of silver and black. He heard the clank of armor, the quiet voices of sentries, the distant howl of an animal across the plains. But there was something else, soft footsteps moving where they shouldn't be. He turned toward the sound and saw a shadow slip between two supply tents. Kael followed, his steps silent. The shadow belonged to one of the queen's own guards. The man crouched near a small fire, speaking in a low voice to another figure one. Kael didn't recognize. Kael moved closer, straining to hear. "Next time she takes the field, make sure the line breaks," the stranger said. "The Varkesh will do the rest." The guard nodded. "And the human? Keep him busy. He's too close to her now." Kael's grip tightened on his sword. He didn't wait to hear more. He stepped forward, the point of his blade aimed at the traitor's throat. "You picked the wrong night." The guard spun, hand going to his weapon, but Kael's strike came first. The flat of his blade slammed into the guard's jaw, dropping him to the ground. The stranger fled into the shadows. Kael gave chase, but the figure was fast. vanishing beyond the outer edge of the camp. By the time Kael returned, the guard was gone too. He cursed under his breath. Whoever they were working with, they had planned this well. When morning came, Kael went to the queen. She was seated outside her tent, sharpening the remains of her broken spear into a shorter weapon. He told her everything. Her eyes darkened. I knew that doubt in my ranks could turn to betrayal. Now I have proof. We should find them before the next attack, Kael said. Her gaze lifted to meet his. We will, but I need you closer than ever, human. If they can't kill me on the battlefield, they will try elsewhere. From that moment, Kael's role changed. He was no longer just a guard in the chaos of war. He was her shadow, her shield. At every step, he followed her through strategy meetings, stood behind her during negotiations, and kept his hand on his weapon even when the camp seemed calm. Days passed, and the tension in the air grew thicker. Scouts reported enemy banners moving across the horizon. The Varkesh were coming again. On the morning of the third day, the horns of war sounded once more. Kael stood at the queen's side as soldiers scrambled into position. This time, the queen did not ride at the front. Her injured leg kept her behind the main lines, commanding from a vantage point on a low hill. The enemy advanced in a black wave, their heavy feet shaking the ground. The clash was brutal from the first moment. Kael stayed alert, watching not just the battlefield but the soldiers around them. It was during a sudden push from the Varkesh that he saw a soldier from their own side breaking formation, moving toward the queen with his blade raised, not toward the enemy but toward her back. Kael's voice cut through the noise. Behind you. He lunged, intercepting the blow before it could land. The traitor's strike glanced off his armor, but Kael's counter hit true, knocking the weapon from the soldier's hand. The man tried to flee, but Kael caught him by the collar and slammed him into the dirt. The queen turned, her expression cold and unreadable. The battlefield roared around them, but for a brief moment. The captured traitor knelt in the queen's command tent, hands bound tightly behind his back. His head was bowed, but his eyes flickered with defiance. The room was silent except for the crackle of the brazier fire. Queen Serenia stood before him, leaning slightly on her spear. Her voice was calm, but the weight in it could crush stone. Tell me who you serve. The man said nothing. Kael stepped forward, his hand resting on his sword hilt. He was ready to kill you while the enemy pushed our lines. Whoever he's working with isn't waiting for the war to end. They want you gone now. Still, the man stayed silent. The queen's gaze was cold as ice. Then you will rot in the prisoner's pit until you find your tongue. The guards dragged him away. As they left, Kael looked at her. If there's one, there are more, and they'll try again. She didn't deny it. We'll be ready. That night the camp was restless. The soldiers knew betrayal was among them. The air felt heavier, as though the very ground carried the weight of suspicion. Kael stayed close to the queen, never letting her out of his sight. Just after midnight, the attack came. It wasn't the Varkesh this time, it was their own. A small group of armed soldiers, faces hidden behind war masks, slipped into the queen's tent. Kael had been waiting in the shadows. The first man through the flap didn't even see him before Kael's blade slammed into his chest. The second swung low, but Kael twisted, grabbing his arm and forcing him into the ground. The queen reached for her weapon, but her leg slowed her. Kael stepped in, cutting down the third before he could strike her. One masked soldier grabbed her from behind, a dagger pressed to her throat. Drop it, human, he snarled. Kael's grip on his sword tightened. Let her go. She dies, the war ends, the man said. Her people scatter, the Varkesh finish the rest. Kael took a step forward. You're wrong. Kill her, and you'll have me to deal with before they even arrive. The man hesitated, the edge of his dagger trembling against the queen's skin. That hesitation was all Kael needed. He moved in a single blur of motion, knocking the dagger aside and driving his shoulder into the man's chest. They hit the ground hard, and Kael's fist came down until the man stopped moving. The queen was breathing hard but unhurt. She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "You've saved my life twice now. You're no longer just my guard." "What am I then?" Kael asked. She didn't answer, but the weight in her gaze told him everything. He was now someone she trusted in a way she trusted no other. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. The captured attackers were thrown into the same pit as the earlier traitor. The queen ordered every soldier in camp to be questioned before dawn. By morning, news came from the scouts. The Varkesh were moving in massive numbers. Their banners stretched across the horizon. It would be the largest battle yet, and it would decide the fate of the war. As Kael strapped on his armor, the queen approached. She still limped, but there was no weakness in her stance. She held out a blade, not the rough sword he had been given before, but a finely crafted weapon with a dark steel edge and an engraved hilt. "This was my brother's," she said. "He fell in battle years ago. Now I give it to you." Kael took it with both hands, feeling the balance and weight. "I'll put it to use. You will stay at my side," she said. "No matter what happens," he nodded, "until the end." The horns of war sounded. Soldiers moved into formation, the air vibrating with the pounding of feet and the clash of weapons being readied. The queen climbed onto a small chariot drawn by armored beasts, and Kael took his place beside her. The Varkesh army appeared like a tide of black stone, their war cries shaking the air. Behind them, massive siege beasts roared, their spines bristling with jagged spikes. The queen raised her spear high, her voice cutting through the noise. "Today we hold the line. Today we fight for every life in this camp." Her soldiers roared back, their voices thundering across the field. Kael looked at her, seeing not the cold ruler who had enslaved his people, but the commander who stood unbroken against impossible odds. He still carried his hate, but now it was tangled with something else, a respect he could not deny. The ground shook as the enemy charged. Kael tightened his grip on the blade she had given him. The final battle had begun, and whatever came next, their fates were tied together. The ground trembled as the Varkesh army crashed into the queen's lines. The sky was filled with the hiss of arrows and the roar of war beasts. Steel met stone in a storm of noise, sparks flying with each strike. Kael stayed at the queen's side, his blade cutting through the first wave of enemies. Every time one came close to her, he was there, blocking, striking, forcing them back. His arms burned, but he did not slow. The queen's voice rang out over the battlefield, steady and commanding, driving her soldiers to hold the line. The Varkesh fought like a living wall, pushing forward inch by inch. Their siege beasts hurled boulders into the camp, tearing apart tents and crushing soldiers where they stood. But the queen did not retreat. She raised her spear, her injured leg braced against the chariot, and pointed to the heart of the enemy army. "Strike their warlord." She shouted. Kael saw him, the massive figure leading the charge, taller than any soldier on the field, wielding a weapon that could split a man in two with a single swing. If he fell, the Varkesh's advance would break. But reaching him meant cutting through a sea of warriors. The queen looked at Kael. "You will go with me." He didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." The chariot surged forward, smashing through the enemy ranks. Kael leapt from it, cutting down two Varkesh who blocked their path. The queen followed, her spear flashing in the sunlight. They fought side by side, the human and the alien queen, each protecting the other without thinking. A massive blow came from the left. Kael blocked it, feeling the shock travel up his arm. He countered, slicing deep into the attacker's side. Another Varkesh lunged for the queen, but she drove her spear through its chest before it could reach her. They reached the warlord. His stone-like armor was blackened from old battles, his eyes burning with rage. He swung his massive blade, and Kael barely ducked in time. The queen struck low, aiming for his leg, but the blow only chipped his armor. The warlord roared and kicked, sending her sprawling to the ground. Kael lunged forward, blocking the killing blow meant for her. The strike tore into his side, but he stayed on his feet. With a shout, he drove his brother's sword into the gap beneath the warlord's arm. The blade sank deep, and the giant staggered. The queen rose, gripping her spear with both hands. She struck upward with all her strength, piercing through the warlord's throat. He let out a guttural cry before collapsing into the mud. For a heartbeat, the battlefield froze. Then the Varkesh roared not in triumph, but in fear. Their leader was dead. The enemy ranks broke, scattering back toward the hills. The queen's army surged forward, chasing them, but she stayed beside Kael, his hand pressed to his side, blood soaking through his armor. "You're hurt," she said. "I live." He replied, though his voice was weaker now. She knelt beside him, her gaze steady. "You've saved me 3 times. You've fought with honor. And you've stood where no one else dared stand. From this day forward, you are no slave." Kael met her eyes. "And what am I now?" Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "You are my warrior." The words hit harder than any blow. He had not fought for a title, yet the weight of it felt right. For the first time since his capture, he felt the chains that bound him truly fall away. The queen stood and offered him her hand. He took it, rising to his feet as the shouts of victory spread across the battlefield. The surviving soldiers knelt. As she passed, their eyes flicking to Kael with something close to respect. That night, the camp celebrated. Fires burned high, music played, and the air was filled with the scent of roasted meat. The queen sat in the center, her warriors gathered around her. Kael stood at her side, no longer in the shadows but in the light of the fire. When the music faded and the soldiers drifted to rest, the queen spoke quietly to him. "You began as my enemy, then you became my shield. Now you are part of my story, and I am part of yours." Kael looked out at the stars. For so long, he had dreamed only of escape. But now, with the war behind them, he realized something had changed. His life was no longer about running. It was about standing, fighting, protecting Dot, and as long as the queen stood, he would stand with her. Dot, in the days to come, their story would be told in both human and alien lands. A tale of hatred turned to survival, and survival turned to something stronger.